You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories of women walking in faith. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 8, Episode 3. Feathers is an outreach of Abiding Ministries. Find more encouragement at abidingministries.net. Well, hey, friend, and welcome to Feathers this week. I hope you've gotten a chance to listen to last week's episode with Beth Forbes. She struggled with infertility and now runs a ministry called Sarah's Laughter, which supports other women who are struggling with infertility or who have experienced child loss. You know, it's amazing to me how sometimes as I do this podcast, stories sometimes sort of bunch together in themes, and I do not plan them that way at all. My guest this week is Cori Salchert. She is known as Hospice Mama, and she previously helped support grieving families who were not able to take home a child from the hospital. And now she fosters children who have been surrendered under the Safe Haven law and have a terminal diagnosis. And I just can't explain how much this episode meant to me. The things Cori has been through and what she learned truly left me really in just tears. I know the topic sounds a little on the depressing side, but if you could just hang on, the redemption in this is that there has been so much wisdom learned through all these difficult circumstances Cori has experienced. So I'm so looking forward to you hearing this conversation. So let's get started. Well, hey, Cori, and welcome to Feathers today.
Hi there.
I'm so glad to have you with me today. How about we start out, you can introduce yourself, your family, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
My name is Cori Salchert, and I am a 52-year-old mom, wife in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, married to Mark 29 and a half years. He will be 63 next month, so a little bit older than I am. And we have 8 biological children in age from 28 to 16. And then a couple of them are married. I don't have any grandkids yet. Still encouraging my married children to get on that. But that's where we're at right now. And then we do medical treatment, foster care, and adoption. And our niche is medically needy children, in particular those who have terminal diagnoses and their life expectancy is brief.
Right, and so I think I've heard the nickname Hospice Mama. Is that something that's been coined?
Yes, and yes, the Hospice Mama. And that is something that, you know, when I think about that, I see the hope, not the we're kind of at the end of the road and this is all about sad. But hospice for me is all about hope, and that I have the opportunity, our family has the opportunity to be able to make sure that these children live until they die, that they don't just lay in a bed and exist until that happens. And so for me, that word hospice is all about hope and all about living the most and the best possible in the time that's given here on this earth.
Oh my goodness, I've never thought about it with that lens, because we're always on the end. If you hear the word hospice, that's just bad news, you know, that's just depressing. But I love your lens that you have where it's hope and making sure they live until they die. And you know, honestly, I don't know if that's some people that don't have a terminal illness even do. At times.
We're very intentional, and I think that hospice ends up lending that intentionality, that, you know what, we're not going to waste the day, because we didn't know for sure how many there are going to be. We don't take it for granted, and so we're very intentional about living.
That is so true. So good. Well, you have you're going to talk about a new book that you have coming out, I Will Love You Forever, and it details out your story about getting into doing this and what it's been like and lessons you've learned. And I'm just so thankful to be able to talk to you. And I know this is going to be encouraging for people. So if people think this is going to be depressing because we're talking about little babies and stuff, I don't want you to tune out yet. I think you are, as you've already seen, going to see a lot of hope and encouragement. So let's just start really from the beginning. How did you get into fostering and adopting children that were in the situation?
Well, I'd like to zero back about 30-some years to when I was in nursing school, and we were dealing with our oncology unit, and I piped up at my naive 21 years of age and said I could never work with cancer patients. I mean, that just would be too depressing. And as God would have it, not only did I end up working with cancer patients, but I worked in hospice for those that were no longer seeking a cure, but instead realized that medicinally there was no more help there to be able to obliterate the cancer, but that they were going to die as a result of it. And so I moved into hospice about 4 years into my nursing career, and then I took 10 years off to have more kids and stay home with them, and I came back in to nursing, and I went to OB. And I thought, all right, I'm going to the other end of the spectrum where I'm not dealing with people who are dying, but rather those that are, giving birth and bringing life into the world. And then found out very quickly on OB maternity that there are a number of families that do not go home with babies in their arms, but rather the baby dies either before birth or shortly afterwards. Mm-hmm. And then I found that my heart for hospice was something that I was drawn into that situation rather than running from it, because those families did not want to be there, and I was compelled to stay with them and do what I could to be able to have memories made of their experience there on that OB floor and of their baby that could be cherished memories, that it wasn't all just pain, and that it wasn't just having a nurse who didn't want to be in the room, who only did what she needed to do and got out and didn't care for them as people because of their grief. I didn't want to be running away from the sadness and then leaving them to deal with it on their own. So the role of bereavement specialist was one that I just felt was perfect for me, and I began a program at our local hospital called Hope After Loss Organization, because again, there is hope. It's not a matter of just despair, not just sadness, but there is also a cherishing of the life for however long it is that the baby was able to be, and the creation of some good memories with that, but it wasn't just something that they looked back on and it was all tragic. So my role as a hospice nurse for OB was one that, I loved, and I was so thankful to be able to be there and to be able to make a difference. Could not change the fact that the baby was going to die, but how it was handled and the grace that was put into that, and blanketing and dressing a baby made them holdable, encouraging the families to be able to have tangible memories, was one that role was one that I loved. Well, then as God worked it out, and I firmly believe that He was totally involved in that process, and He created a health crisis in my life. I have been sick since before I was born, and struggled with health issues all of my life, and expect that I'm going to go to my grave doing so. I have a number of autoimmune diseases that are tamped down so that I can live with them, but they're not going to go away. And it just kind of hit the fan, and I was wiped out and on my deathbed, and got to the point where I had always, and this is what is so crazy, I had always advocated for these babies, that, they should be treated with dignity, that they should be clothed, that they should be blanketed, that they should be held. And yet there was a standard for myself that I was valuable because I was productive, because I was able to contribute. And God took me through a time where I was completely bedridden. The only thing I could do was get out and stumble to the bathroom and then climb back into bed again. And at one point, I felt like God just said, Cori, I'm okay with you laying in this bed. And I'm not looking at you and saying, I like you better when you're busy. I like you better when you're getting something done. And I really hate the fact that you're laying here and you're just a drain emotionally and physically and financially. And I'm angry with you over that. I just firmly believe that God said, I am carrying you now. And one of the messages that I want you to get is that I don't love you better busy. And I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and I've come out on the other side of that, understanding that I couldn't base human value for babies differently than I did for everyone else, and that God is the one who intrinsically gives us value because we are created in His image, and that I deserved, because of being created in His image, to be treated with dignity and for my family to stay and continue to care for me even though I was such a burden. Just like these kiddos that we take in, because the ones that we have, they're not really able to smile. Their eyes don't light up when they see us. They don't say thank you. They're never going to get out of that bed and say, I'm going to help contribute to the family now. Thank you so much for giving to me. No, they are completely dependent, and that love is unconditional. And I have been shown that unconditional love by God. And so, I'm just like full up. And full of that hope, as well as the mercy that was granted to me and that love. And it's what spills over onto the kiddos that we bring home, who, yes, are going to break my heart and are going to cause grief, and they get my adrenal glands going because they flirt with death and create tension, and, there's a lot of care that's involved with them. But I never look at them and think, you're not worth it. You're not worth it. They are worth it. They are created in the image of God. And because He has chosen me, and then in turn has chosen these children to be a part of our life, I never look at them and think, I wish you hadn't come.
Oh, my goodness. So I'm like drying tears here. That is just, we could stop right there. That's incredible. That statement, I don't love you better busy, that cuts right to my core.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those producers too, right? And so many people are, is that I'm valuable. Yeah. I'm valuable when I've produced something. Particularly for God.
And I can tick off a list at the end of the day.
Oh, yes. I will write something down.
He doesn't love you better.
Yeah. I will write something down just so I can check it off. And that is not a joke.
Get out of bed, brush teeth, and I can tick that off my list. And he gifted me with that time of incredible suffering so that I would stop chasing being enough, because humanly, I'm never going to be enough. How much is enough? I mean, really, honestly, how many kiddos do I need to take in? How many kiddos do I need to have? How many lives do I need to impact? I mean, what's that number? No, I'm sad, because you know what? Jesus is enough. And so I can work from a place of Him declaring me His beloved, and can give out of the well of His love, not out of trying to earn any favor, because He just loves me the way I am. I don't have to be any better. I don't have to do any more. And coming from that perspective just takes, I go to bed night after night, and I don't get it all done. I just don't. I don't get it all done, but now I can rest my head, and I think it was never about you getting it all done. God is not unhappy with me. I have given what I can give, and He has got the rest.
Yes, that leaves you in such a place of rest. That's incredible.
Yes, that I didn't have for years.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. And so many people don't. so many, including myself, I would say. I do want to
But
go.
there's hope. You're still breathing.
Yes. I do want to jump into one specific little girl, your first one, Emmeline, that you detail out in the book. Just incredible. One of the things that I thought was so amazing is that, you know, as we talk about this, I think you had said that it might have been one of your sons that had come to visit, and or maybe it was a friend that had come to expect to visit at your house, and it was going to be somber and depressing and sad, and yet they found it quite different. So describe for us a little bit about, you know, what that looked like and what your days were like, especially with Emmeline.
With Emmeline, it was already settled that her life was going to be brief. And so my goal was to live each day with her being loved, and especially because she was just only a few weeks old. You know, she wasn't expecting Disney. She wasn't expecting anything. And so everything that we did for her was just gravy on the mashed potatoes. It was a good thing, and she mostly just needed to be held in order to stay warm enough. She couldn't regulate her temperature very well, so was carried around by just about everybody and held almost constantly. Would not necessarily recommend that for a normal baby. They do need to have their time to entertain themselves, but Emmeline was a completely different situation there. And yes, it was actually our pediatrician that he was just blown away and called me and said, how in the world did you get into this? And I said, I asked for it. I let it be known that I was willing to take a baby if their mom and dad could not stay, could not deal, to please leave them in a safe place, and that our family was willing to take them in and love them through their life until they died. And that was a little staggering for him. I don't know that he knew exactly whether my head was completely attached or not, but he showed up at the house, and I just, you know, the place was in full color, and music was playing, and you know, we were not standing around, you know, mourning at that point in time, and crying and shaking, and everything, you know, was dark. No, it was something that, because of my illness and the struggles that we had had for a couple of years, it had gotten just slogged through each day. And when Emmeline came, there was a vibrancy and a joy that we hadn't had in quite a while, and there was a purposefulness that we had the opportunity to speak life into this baby, that she would not be left in the corner of the room in a bassinet, not needing to be held because there was a kangaroo pump that could feed her, so that wasn't even necessary. No, we were out to make sure she had a life, and it was quite evident in our whole family, not just me, because this certainly doesn't happen just because I wanted to have a family who is more than willing to come alongside. And no, they didn't necessarily know what all was going on. We didn't know when she was going to die. They just went along with the fact that I had the confidence that we were going to be okay, even though she was going to die, that this was not going to be something that was going to knock us down and leave us there.
So what was that? So Emmeline did last, she lived 50 days. Is that right?
Yes.
No, she lived 50 days. So describe that. I love that you talk about your family and that they were involved. So your daughters are taking shifts at night to help care for her. You know, I think a lot of people would say, you know, I don't think I could do that myself. And then to think of, you know, after she passed, my family, how that's going to impact them. What would you say has been the impact since taking care of her with your family in particular? Specifically,
yes. Mary Elizabeth, she was one of my girls that would take night shift with Emmeline. She had some wrestling to do with being afraid of death. And until you have to deal with it, you can ignore it. And we certainly had people that said, well, it's one thing for you to do this, but we cannot understand why you would put your children through it. And last time I checked, there's like 100% death rate. We're all going to die. There were a couple, Elijah and Methuselah that didn't. But other than that, everybody's going to die. And so being a little bit more matter of fact, there are things that we can't do anything about. So, okay, fine. And then there are things that we can do something about. And focusing on what it is that we can do something about was where we lived. And Mary Elizabeth, especially at 14 years of age, I did not ask her to stay with Emma Lynn. She wanted to keep up with her 16-year-old and 18-year-old sisters and said, no, I want to do this. And has told me, Mom, you know what? What I learned from Emma Lynn is that it's not all about me. And as a teenager, I could be very selfish and egotistical, and Emma Lynn needed me to step outside of my comfort zone, because I could have said, no, I don't want to deal with this. But wading into it was better than keeping herself apart. And so, as one of my older boys said, I thought my mom was crazy. I mean, hello, why would you set yourself up for this kind of grief? And he said, but she said it would be better. This baby's going to die. We already know that. But we don't have to live with regret that she wasn't loved. And so we made sure that we did a really good job of that.
That's so good. Yeah, and I think it teaches, and it doesn't mean that it wasn't hard, right? But I think these kind of things can teach our kids so much more of value than the hard times.
Yes. Well, and the thing is that death is a part of life, but for whatever reason, it seems like, we just kind of, don't deal with it head on. And what they think about it is scarier. When I was working as a hospice nurse in OB, families would come to me and say, I don't know whether or not my 4-year-old should be there. I don't know whether or not my 7-year-old would be there. And I would pose the question, do they know that you're pregnant? Do they know that you're having a baby? Yes. Okay, if you come home from the hospital and you don't have the baby anymore, there's all kinds of wild imaginations that go on for those children when that happens. And instead, you can let them have the time with this baby, because you're probably going to be more scared of what you think than of the reality. And they can know that they were included and not excluded, and that it's something that they don't have to be so fearful about moving forward. And more often than not, I would have these children who were more than willing to sit on my lap and then hold their sibling, and were very matter of fact about it. It was like, okay, I'm so glad I got to see you, baby. Can I have some potato chips?
Right. Isn't it amazing how kids...
Get some potato chips.
Yeah.
Yes, the resilience. But I did have one 4-year-old who was just amazing to me. He told me, he said, do you know why I'm not afraid of the thunder? And I said, no. And he said, it's because it's my brother and sister who had passed away, had died. He said, they're pouring out the rain and they're sprinkling the snow.
Aww.
And I said, well, that's great. And then when he was leaving, the 4-year-old came up to me and he said, you're going to stay with my brother until the funeral director gets here, right? I said, yes, I'm going to stay with your brother. And he said, thank you. I'm glad that they're not going to be alone. And, this is a 4-year-old that is wrapping his head around this the best way possible, who is not walking around scarred and unhappy. And that was a gift, and that is what bereavement specialists, and there are lots of them just like me, that step into that role in a hospital that can make all the difference between a really awful situation and one that is awful, yes, but also has elements of thank you. You recognize that this child is a child and not a situation to just get past and get over and go home and forget.
That's just amazing. I think that's a fantastic approach. That I would probably be one of the ones that said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think they can handle that." But I love that perspective. And kids really, they do handle things such matter of fact, and sometimes they teach us so much better than we can teach them.
Well, and they do pick up on our, if the attempt is made that, it's definitely sad and that it's perfectly all right to be able to cry, but we don't want to be, just absolutely losing it and in hysterics, because that's more frightening to them than the actual, baby dying. My kids have told me that, with Charlie, they just said, you know what, you can't be freaking out.
Right.
I know that it's awful when he's gray and we're trying to clear his airway and it's not working very well, but we need you to be trusting God at that point in time that it's going to be okay no matter what happens, because then we feel better about, being in the situation. But, you freaking out just is scarier to us than Charlie dying. So there's that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So, let's see. There's so much I could ask you right now. So one of the things that I do want to ask you about is, just the fact that you have struggled so much. In the book, you talk about, some childhood tragedy that you've gone through with your little sister, your health that you've gone through, and of course the grief that you've gone through. It just so much struggling. And you touch on it on the book several times, but I really want you to talk to it and get your perspective here. For those that might be asking the question, is God good, even though he allows all of this suffering with these little children? You ask the question, why would he even allow them to be born if they are going to suffer? And so I just want your perspective, even through your suffering and these children's, suffering at times. How do you answer the question, is God good?
I think that is a solid truth, that God is good and that he is faithful and that he is just. And so when I put on my glasses, that is the lens that I am looking at the circumstances through, rather than looking at the circumstances as the lens and then God on the other side of it. Because if I look at the circumstances, it would look like God was not good and that he's not faithful. And that's my perspective. And if you put your hand up to your eye and make a telescope, with your fist, our perspective is very limited anyway. And then I don't have God's perspective on all of it. So he had to bring me through a number of my worst case scenarios in order to shake it loose, that I could judge him as unfaithful because he didn't step in here, because he didn't change that, because he didn't allow this situation to take place the way I wanted. It had to finally come to a point where it's like, you know what, God is good, period, not because he does what I tell him to do. And that may sound really stupid or simplistic, but God is not a lion to be tamed. And I will tell you that my perspective on him is that, oh my goodness, I am just in awe of him. But yet he, like Aslan, he's good. He's incredibly scary. And I wouldn't do things the way he does things, but he doesn't have focus groups. He doesn't let me weigh in and say, hey, you know what, I really think that you should do it this way. No, he says, you know what, I am God. And I read through the Bible chronologically, and I'd never done that before, and I thought this is going to be drier than burnt toast. I mean, hello, Leviticus, I just get a little bit bogged down there. However, when I did read through the Bible chronologically, over and over and over and over again, it says, and everything that had happened, whether it was infertility or whether it was war or whether it was peace or whether it was famine or it was plenty, had happened so that you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So we have the potential for every single circumstance that comes into our life to hand that to him and say, redeem it. I want to know that you are the Lord my God, not just the God. I want to know that you are the Lord, my God. And I can look back, and it gives me such hope and perseverance in the really hard times, because I know that he's got 10,000 things going at once, that it's not just about Charlie, that it's not just about our 14-year-old, it's not just about my health. There are so many other things that he is redeeming all of that and working it together for good. And sometimes in that process, it looks like a pile of poo, but it's not done yet. It's not done yet. He says, see, I'm making all things new. And we are privy to some of that working out, but not to everything. But with everything that I have gone through, with the death of my sister, as well as my health issues, and him saying, you have got to stop judging whether or not I'm good based on whether or not I answer your prayers the way you pray them. I'm either good or forget it. He's either trustworthy or he's not. And he is. It doesn't have to change on a whim depending on how my hormones are doing or how my circumstances are doing. My God is good. My God is faithful. And I'm going to trust him in this darkness, in that valley of the shadow of death, that I don't have to fear any evil. 365 times he says, don't be afraid. And the only way I can do it and not be afraid is that he's got me. He's got us. And even though I can't always see it, he is working it all out for his glory, and there is nothing greater than that.
That is so good. The verse that comes to my mind is, his ways are not our ways. And I think it really is just that understanding that God has a totally different perspective than we do, and working out it a totally different way than sometimes we choose. But really, it is just a bottom line. Are we going to trust him that he is good? Because his word says he's good.
Right.
So we can know it from there. But I think experientially, sometimes we question, is that really true?
Yes. And I have a tendency to submerge all of the circumstances, and my hand is just up, and it's like, when they say, when you don't know what to pray, just say Jesus. So that is it. At the end of the day, it's like, God. There's a song by Sherry Easter, and she wrote it because of her breast cancer journey, and yet the lyrics are, when I don't know what to pray, hear my heart. When there are no words to say, you know all the ways I need you, all the ways I'm weak. So hear my heart. So I don't have the perfect prayers. I don't have the perfect words, but I know that God hears what it is in my heart that I need him to hear, and he interprets it exactly the way it is that it needs to be answered, and he is has sustained me and will continue to sustain me in spite of so many things unknown with Charlie, and how he's going to die, and our 14-year-old right now, and how he'll pass away, and any of my kids or any of the people that I love. Life just changes with a phone call, but I don't want to live so afraid of living that I just cower and shelter and don't take any risks. I want to be so afraid of dying that I die 1,000 deaths before it actually happens. I want to cower through life scared to death of death. It's going to happen. And like, that thing that I had mentioned with Beth Moore, you know what? If I die, I die. Okay. Because you know what? Then everything else is like, whatever. Before then, if you finally shake it loose, then what are you the most afraid of? If they died, I don't know that I would be able to manage. So if this worst case scenario, then God, then God, then God, and I will get up again.
Mm-hmm. That's so true, and that was such a big thing for me, letting go of a lot of fears, is rolling down that scenario. Well, what if that did happen? And you get to the end of it, and you realize, well, God will still be there. God will still be there. I will not be alone, and He will help me through whatever it is that worst case is.
That was such a gift to me, that whole psychological warfare, that, you know what, the enemy will taunt you with it over and over and over again, even if it never happens. And it's like, you know what, I don't want to live like that. I don't want to live like that. I want to live knowing that God is going to be there no matter what, because that makes us incredibly brave.
Mm-hmm. I want to spend a few minutes now talking, if you could talk to people that are listening that may have lost a child, whether, preterm, at birth, or they might have lived a short life, and they didn't get the care that someone like you might have given to them, and were not able to grieve. How can do you have any advice for them as they look back on that time, how they can, what can they do now? Can they honor that time? Even anything practical that you would advise them to do?
I had one mom that came to me, and her baby died 4 days to the hour from when he was born. And just the whole scenario was just really messed up. And she was grieving, and there was so much hurt and so much pain. And I felt a little overwhelmed with it. But I told her, I said, okay, I know we can't go back and change any of that. But I am praying that you're going to be able to come up with one thing that if you'd been able to do it any differently, that there was one thing that you might have done to change it, and he was going to die, but that would have made it a little easier to bear. And she came back a couple of weeks later, and she said, books. I love to read, and I always wanted to read to him. In fact, his name meant the never-ending story. She wanted to be able to read to him, and there was nothing in the emergency room for a baby that she could read. Some magazines, yes. And I said, okay, so then what can you do about that? Well, she went on a book drive and gathered hundreds of children's books, and then we took that to the area hospitals and dropped off in the ED so that if a parent found themselves in the emergency room and wanted to be able to read to their child and offer some comfort that way, that they would have the means to be able to do it. Now, did it take all the pain away? No. Did it take all of the grief away? No. But there was some purposeful redemption that was accomplished by looking at it and saying, there are things I can't change, but what is one thing, or what are a couple of things that if I could do it differently, this is what I would like to be able to have done. And that is what I would say, is that I have laid that out like the Selah song. It may be unfulfilled, it may be unrestored, but anything that's shattered, that's laid before the Lord, just watch and see. It will not be unredeemed. And I don't know what the time frame is on that, but I know that when I have laid out every single hurtful situation that comes to mind, and I say, okay, here, you know what? Amy's not coming back. My sister's not coming back. Redeem it. And he has been faithful to do that, not instantaneously, but in ways that he answered that prayer abundantly above what I could have ever asked or thought.
That is incredible. That is such amazing, wise advice that that he can redeem it. And so how often does he do that through other people? And that he can take our pain and use it for a purpose. Wow, that's such good stuff. Okay, well, our time is coming to a close, and I just hate that. But is there any other one thing that you would like to share before we go?
I guess what I really would like to share and would encourage people in reading this book is that, you know what, I would like to be known, that it's not just from afar, that, you know, someone looks at what I do and say, oh, I love you, but that they know the struggles that I've had, that they know that I have made the deadly choice to not believe God was good, to believe that he was not faithful. But he hung on to me in spite of my making that decision. And because he is good, he allowed me to face a lot of my worst case scenarios, and I've come out on the other side with that verse, you know, these trials produce perseverance, and they produce character, and they produce hope, because the perseverance, once you've made it through, you know, you have some character to stay by the stuff and to be brave. And it also produces hope that, you know what, if he was there for me then, there's no reason to believe that he won't be there for me now. Mm-hmm. So the book, I would hope, is not something about, okay, hey, you know what, this is your opportunity to see how this woman walks on water and that this is the outpouring of that. No, this is about a woman who has failed miserably, and God has said, I'm not done with you. I'm not done with you. But I am working all things together for good, and I'm going to do some extraordinary things through you just being willing to be used. Not because I'm naturally capable, because I'm not, but just the willingness to say, God, send me anywhere. And sometimes that might just be to stay home or to go. And that's where he's got me right now. That, you know what, you send me where you need me to go, and that might be to my family room, that might be to my living room, that might be to Children's Hospital, that might be, you know, to go speak wherever. I just want to be faithful. And at the end of the day, I just want to lay my head on the pillow and go, you know what, I've loved you to the best of my capability, and I know that you love me.
Oh, that's so good. I love that final thought. It's just God saying, I'm not done with you. And he's not done with any of us. If you're listening, God's not done with you.
Right.
That's an incredible message.
You're still breathing. There's still hope.
Yes. Well, Cori, I have just enjoyed this so much. You have so much wisdom to share through what you have been through, and I'm so thankful. If people want to connect with you, do you have a place to do that for them online?
Cori Salchert is just my Facebook page. You know, they can certainly find me there. Safe Haven for Babies, A Life Worth Loving is another outlet that they can kind of keep up. And again, you know, don't be expecting to find someone who walks on water, because there is only one who does. But I know him, and I would love for people to know him too.
Yes. And like I said, I don't know if I said it before we started recording or not, but I read the book, and it is just absolutely fantastic. We just scratched the surface on all the amazing stories that Cori has to share, her heart of her background, and it's just really incredible how God has worked. So I encourage everybody to pick that book up. But Cori, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you. I'm so glad we were able to chat.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Cori. It's a deep, sensitive topic to talk about infant and child loss, but I just love Cori's outlook, you know, especially around hospice, that it's all about giving the person as much life as possible until they're gone. And I was certainly pro-life before meeting and talking to Cori, but I think she just gave me an extra boost of the value and respect of life. And something else I'm certainly going to take away from this is the fact that God told her, and really I believe he would say this to all of us, is I don't love you better busy. That is just so impactful to me, and certainly is a lesson I've been learning the past few years. We've talked about the Enneagram here before. I'm a 3, which is the performer or producer. So that statement really hits me at my core need and desire, that I need to do to feel like I have value. So to hear that that is not the case, it always hits me so hard, and it's definitely something I have to remember on a consistent basis, because man, I sure can get into that striving mode and feel like I need to do to be loved and have value, really not just to God, but others around me too. So shout out to the other threes out there. I believe that was a word for us. The other thing I want to touch on is this idea of suffering, and something Cori said. She said, because he is good, he allowed me to face my worst case scenarios. And that really is a surprising statement for some people, that God would allow someone to face a worst case scenario out of his love. But what Cori can see on the other end of that is that it did bring out this knowledge that she doesn't have to do and strive for him to love her. So perhaps some of you are going through a difficult time. Perhaps what we need to see is that you are right where God would have you, and that you are living in the perfect next steps he would have. So take heart. God is working in you and through you, and maybe we won't see it today or tomorrow, but it will work together for good. The other thing that I just have to take from Cori's conversation and what she is doing now, taking care of these little ones, is just how important it is for us to remember that we cannot love others in this extravagant way out of our own self. It really is giving out of the well of God's love. And no matter who we are loving today, I think it's just so important for us to remember that we need to look to him to be able to do that. All right, guys, that'll do it for this week. Please share this episode if you think it could encourage someone. You can find posts on Instagram and Facebook under Abiding Ministries. I appreciate you guys listening so much, and we'll see you next week on Feathers.